So let's get started. We are in Perek Vav of Sefer Melachim Aleph, and we're leading up to, at this point already, the highlight of the opening chapters, which is the building of the Beit HaMikdash. And so the Perek begins with a very simple statement. Vayi b'shmonim shana v'arba ma'ot shana l'tzeit b'nei Yisrael mi'aretz Mitzrayim. It was 480 years since the Jews had left Mitzrayim. That number 480 is fascinating because it's both the amount of time between the Yetziat Mitzrayim, between the Exodus and the building of the first Beit HaMikdash, and between the first Beit HaMikdash and the second. The first Beit HaMikdash existed for 410 years. There was a 70-year galut, which took place between its destruction and the beginning of the building of the second. So 480 we have happening in two situations: Yetziat Mitzrayim to the first Beit HaMikdash, first Beit HaMikdash to the second Beit HaMikdash. However, as the Barbanel notes in his introduction to this, as much as there are comparisons, it's impossible to have an absolute comparison. The Mishkan was of the highest. The first Beit HaMikdash was a little less, and the second Beit HaMikdash was even less than that. The Mishkan, obviously, which was built by Moshe Rabbeinu, was established through miracles, and versus this first Beit HaMikdash, which did still have the Aron and had all of the Kelim, but on the other hand, the second Beit HaMikdash, there was absent the Aron itself. Now, when did this happen? Says the Navi, B'shana ha'revi'it b'chodesh Ziv, hu chodesh hasheni limloch Shlomo al Yisrael. It was in the fourth year of Shlomo HaMelech's rule. Now, the interesting thing about the fourth year is, why did he wait 4 years? And so there is a medrash that Rashi quotes in next week's Perek, which talks about the fact that Shlomo wanted to build the Beit HaMikdash from his own utensils, from the things that he had collected. It took 4 years to amass that treasury. There are two different explanations that Rashi offers. One reason is simply that his father wasn't allowed to build the Beit HaMikdash. So as a result, he had to build the Beit HaMikdash and he understood it, with all of his own things, and not with David HaMelech possessions. But there is a second explanation within Rashi, which is very, very difficult, where Shlomo HaMelech actually was critical of his father. Because if you remember, at the end of David HaMelech's reign, there was a terrible famine for 3 years. At that time of the terrible famine, Shlomo responds to his father, even though his father has already passed away: you should have used anything in your treasury to respond to the famine. Instead, you were collecting articles for the building of the Beit HaMikdash. That was inappropriate, so I don't want to touch those things. So it's in the fourth year. It took him 4 years to put the necessary steps together, and it was in Chodesh Ziv. Now, if you recall, the names of the months that we have are actually not Jewish names, but rather they're Babylonian names, and Tishrei, Cheshvan, etc. are not our own names. They're taken from Babylon. The original names went through two different eras. The first was simply numbers, Chodesh Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi, etc. But then with the passage of time, the Lagon points out, as I'm sure we all remember, that there were names that were given. We only have some of them. So for example, we have Chodesh Ziv that appears here, which is the month of Iyar. We will have Tishrei, which is also found, which in a couple of prakim, which is called Chodesh Eitanim. We have also the month called Bul, which is Cheshvan. That we'll find later in the Perek. And according to the Vilna Gaon, the month of Nisan was actually called Aviv. Chodesh Aviv was not just a descriptor, but according to the Vilna Gaon, it was actually the name of the month. So we still have 4 of the months, the original names that were used at this time. We don't have the other 8 along the way. The reason why it's called Ziv is simply because if you think about Chodesh Iyar, which we're about to enter into, it's the beginning, as Targum Yonatan says, Nitzanya. It's the time of the beginning of the blossoming. The trees are beginning to blossom, and that's the Ziv that we begin to have, which is why this month was given a name, its name. Vayiven habayit laHashem. And he built the house of Hashem. Now in Divrei Yamim, we see that this house actually took 7 years to build. And so we see that at the end of this parak. So Divrei Yamim actually phrases it differently. In Divrei Yamim it says, Vayachel Shlomo livnot et habayit. Shlomo began to build the house. It wasn't that he built it right then. Beginning of the 4th year, he begins to build the Beit HaMikdash. And now we begin to have a description of this Beit HaMikdash. V'habayit asher banash hamelech Shlomo laHashem, shishim ama orko, v'etrim rochbo, ushloshim ama komato. And the house that Shlomo HaMelech built was 60 ama in length, and it was 20 ama in width, and it was 30 ama in height. Yafa, you have a question?
Yes, sorry to disturb, but it's a few questions on the first pasuk.
Go ahead.
The first one is, you said that there was 480 years between both Batei Mikdash. Is there a significance that somebody attaches to that? It's really interesting. And the second question, is, why is it important to count from the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim?
Okay, so the counting of Yetziat Mitzrayim makes a lot. The counting from Yetziat Mitzrayim makes a lot of sense, because if you remember, in the Shirat Hayam, in the Az Yashir, we already talk about the Beit HaMikdash. Tiviemo v'titiemo b'har nachlatcha machol l'shivtecha pa'al tasha. So already at the moment of Exodus, we said this was going to happen. So to count from that moment makes all the sense in the world. I haven't found a really good answer of why 480. I just read something recently that Rav Moshe Lichtenstein quoted his grandfather, the Rav, in a different kind of context, a very different context. Is the Baal Torah Tamima, who was the Reb Baruch Halevi Epstein, who wrote the Torah Tamima, the Makor Baruch, other things along the way. He has some fascinating questions, which he finds, for instance, some of us, we encountered it earlier when we had the question of Magdil Yeshuot Malko and Migdal Yeshuot Malko, where he said it was a printer's mistake, that the printer had said, B'Shmuel Bet, Bet Shin Bet, it should say Migdal, and people misunderstood it to being B'Shabbat, to be Migdal. He has another one around the Yom Tovim, where it is Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim. He maintains Hazmanim was not actually meant to be the holidays, but it was meant to mean Hazmanim. You fill in the name of the holidays. That it should have been originally Mekadesh Yisrael v'Pesach, Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hasukot. Okay, and in those he says that was original, and it was a mistake. It was a printer's error, and both of those comments have been disproven. There's a wonderful piece by Rav Kasher in one of his volumes of Torah Shlema about it. Rav Eitan Henkin, Hashem Yikom Damo, who was murdered in a terrorist attack several years back, has a piece about it as well to disprove it. But the Rav, when he presented these questions, he said that his grandfather, Reb Chaim, had said, it's a good akashim, it's a very good question, and it's a fakrum teshuva, and it's a very bad, terrible answer. So it's a great question. Why 480 years? I haven't found a good answer for the 480. And there must be a reason, because these kind of coincidences are unusual. Long answer to a very good question. Now, in terms of the size of the Beit HaMikdash, so I wanted to share with you, I sent to you some drawings. And the first one, which was identified as Melachim 1, Sforno, is the one I want to draw your attention to first. And I'll just bring it up on my screen as well so you can see it. If you notice in the top right corner, we have a number, well, actually on the page, we have a number of different maps of what the Beit HaMikdash might have looked like. The first map that we have, the one that is coming from the top right, is a simple overhead view. And if you notice, this middle chamber, which we will refer to as the Heichal in this chapter, but is called the Kodesh in other places. It was 40 amot from here to here, from right to left, or in this case, from east to west. The inner chamber was another 20 amot, which is a total of 60 amot. And this section is what we're describing in this pasuk, just this section here, that middle piece. That middle piece is the core of the Beit HaMikdash, step number one. Now, around it, we'll see in a moment, we'll talk about these chambers that were all around it. There is a major machloket, which we'll get into in a moment, and I'm going now to the bottom drawing here. And this is a drawing based on Sforno. Rashi disagrees with this entirely. But what the Sforno points out here is, if you notice, this is a side view. And now in this side view, this section, which I've highlighted, I think you can see the highlight, is again going to be 60 amot in length from right to left. The height, which is what's originally described here in Pasuk Bet, is 30 amot. Now the challenge we're going to have with this 30 amot, somebody's making a lot of noise, so if you wouldn't mind muting yourself, whoever it is, you're turning a lot of pages and things, or moving the phone around. If you notice, the problem we're going to have with this 30 amot is there are going to be two other descriptions of height. One is going to be for the antechamber, the ulam, the entranceway or the lobby, which is going to be described as 120 amot in height. And the other is going to be the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the devir, that innermost chamber, which is described as 20 amot. So the Sforno takes the approach that actually there were two different exterior heights. There was the outer chamber, that entranceway that was very, very tall and imposing. It was 120 amot. 120 amot in feet is about 240 feet, somewhere between 180 and 240 feet. So if you just take it simply, it's about 10 stories tall. However, the main part, which we've just described, was only 30 amot high, again, somewhere between 45 and 60 feet tall. And that, the inner chamber, this area called the devir, had a drop ceiling, where over the ceiling, we'll get into it a little bit more, over the ceiling there was an attic. And that attic was used for a number of different purposes, including maintenance, where from this attic, for example, if something had to be taken care of in the lower chamber, which a person, the only one who was supposed to go in there was the Kohen Gadol, but if something needed to be taken care of, they were dropped from this upper chamber through a trap door, and they were lowered down in a contraption, almost like with a pulley, like an elevator, almost lowered down to be able to take care of whatever was going to take care of. And that is the part of the reason for the attic up here. Rashi is going to disagree with this. And Rashi's position, which is the other one I gave you, which is the other chart, and I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller so we can see the whole thing. Rashi's position is that the entire building is going to be 120 amot high, that it's a squared off building, and that there actually were atticways above what's called this aliyah, the upper chamber, was both over the Heichal and also over the Kodesh HaKodashim, the devir. So you had drop ceilings, in essence, over this area and this area. And then that area up here was used for all different purposes, including storage, which would be up here. And according to this approach, actually, there was even at one point a staircase that went up on a diagonal, which we'll see later on described. We're not sure where that staircase is, but Rashi's approach is like this. So you have two different descriptions. In Pasuk Bet, all we're talking about in Pasuk Bet, and to go back to it, we are just talking about this one section of the Heichal and the devir. That's it. Okay? Just the Heichal and the devir. And those were the heights. Now, the Radak, again, this idea of this machloket between the entire piece, Rashi, the Radak, and others, are because There it talks about, in Divrei Yamim, it talks about the fact that the height was 120. And so the way you can say is the height was 120, but the inner height was only 30. That's their approach. Sforno and others disagree with it entirely. V'ha'ulam, Posuk Gimel, v'ha'ulam al pnei heichal habayit, esrim ama orko, al pnei rochav habayit. And in front of this structure, and this again is this area here, this lobby way, okay? In this ulam, this area was the same width as the rest of the building, which means that it was al pnei rochav habayit, okay, that it was 20 amot along the whole width of the bayit, but it was narrower, it was less, it was more shallow, it was only 10 amot inward from there, from that piece, and you can see it again here. This is only 10, it's 20 amot wide, but it's only 10 amot in depth itself. The pasuk continues, Vayaz labayit kufim atumim. And they were made on this bayit, there were windows.
Shelley?
And the windows, hello, Shelley, whoever it is, just, I don't mind if you mute. In fact, for a moment, with your permission, I'm going to mute you all, and you can unmute yourselves whenever you'd like. There were windows that were along this building. Now, actually, we're not sure how the windows were structured. This is one proposal. There was another proposal, like you'll see in this chart, which I'll use in a moment, where there were 2 levels of windows. And again, these 2 levels of the windows on the left side take the approach of the Radak and Rashi that the whole building was very, very tall. But along there were chalonei shkufim atumim. Now, the problem with the words shkufim atumim is shakuf means transparent. Atum means closed off. And so there's a question of how do you have closed windows and open windows at the very same time? So the Abarbanel offers 3 different possibilities on this. His first possibility is simply tuchim begam skurim. He says, listen, they were opened and they were closed. It's entirely possible that there were louvers of some nature. The Vilna Gaon actually says that there were shutters on the window and allowed them to be opened and closed, either way. Another possibility he offers is that the windows were not straight. So you couldn't really look from the outside inside or see from the inside outside. It allowed windows, but the windows were curved in some structure. The third possibility is that they were windows that had glass on them, but the glass was translucent and not transparent. So they let light in, but they didn't allow people to see in. Rashi quotes the famous explanation of Chazal that actually the windows were built where the outside of the window, the outer part on the outside of the structure, was a big opening, and there was I'm sorry, I got it the other way around. No, I have it right. That they were on the outside, it was a big opening, and on the inside was a small opening. What was the reason behind it? To say very simply that the light, the windows weren't there to provide light for the inside, but the inside was to provide the light for the outside. That it's an idea that the inspiration of the world comes from within the building and not from outside the building inward. All 4 of these are possible explanations. We don't know for sure what it was because of this unusual phrase. Vayiven al kir habayit, and along the outside of the building, Yatzia Saviv. There was built this Yatzia. Now, Yatzia is really like chambers, or actually almost like boxes. And if you look right along the outside here, you're going to see these little areas, okay, which are small rooms. We'll see the size in just a moment. That went along 3 sides of the Beit HaMikdash. You also see them in this drawing in a different kind of cutaway. And you see that these rooms are different sizes, which we'll talk about in a moment. And one more, if you look at the bottom right of the drawing, you see also how the bottom right drawing on its left side, you see again how these rooms were structured. Vayiven et kir habayit yatzia saviv, so around, et kirot habayit saviv lahechal v'ladvir. But they weren't all the way around the building. They only went around the parts of the building that had the Heichal and the Devir. So the part with the Ulam, there were no rooms over here on the side. These didn't exist. Vayas Tzelaot Saviv. And they made Tzelaot. Now, Tzelaot, according to the Vilna Gaon, is actually the walls of these rooms. These rooms were used for storage. They were used for preparation purposes. As we all know, when you build a house, you can never have enough closets. So this was the equivalent of that, but on a most sacred fashion of it as well. Hayatzia hatachtona chamesh ba'ama. Now the lower level of these, that small room was only 5 amot in width. 5 amot in width is very simple. It's again somewhere between 7.5 and 10 feet in width. And then v'hatichona shesh ba'ama rachba. And the middle level, the second floor, they were 1 amma wider. So again, 9 to 12 feet. V'hashlishit, and the upper floor, sheva ba'ama rochba. They were 7 amot. The rooms were bigger. Ki migraot natan labayit saviv chutza levilti achoz b'kirot habayit. Because there were setbacks that were built into the outer walls of the Beit HaMikdash. Now, if you look on this bottom right drawing, where I have highlighted right now, let me just try to move this around for a second. Okay, the bottom right drawing, you'll see that you have the wall. Now, that's actually the western wall of this building. All the way on the left, we go from east to west. The western wall, you notice, is built like steps. And there was room for these small rooms to be built into the wall. The reason why it was built in this structure, the Radak says, is going to be very simple, and it's the next pasuk. V'habayit b'hibanoto even shlema masa nivna. Because the stones of the wall that made up these walls were made out of complete stones. The Radak says very simply, if you had normally built an addition around the area, what you would do is you would anchor that addition by putting boards or something that went into the building itself, into the wall itself. If you can imagine for a moment, when you go by the Kotel, for example, and especially if you go by the inside section of the Kotel, so all the way to the left, where it's clear how we tore down in 67 the Arab houses that were built there and the Roman buildings and all the other layers before them, you see that carved into the stones of the Kotel are generally these square holes. Because what they would do is they would use a wall of the Kotel, but to attach it to their home, they had to somehow put beams that went into the wall. So the wall supported those beams. That was necessary. Here, if I wanted to build these outer chambers, these ta'im, my problem would be, how do I attach it to the wall? Well, the Radak says, I have to make these complete stones. Well, if I had stones with holes in them, they're not considered complete stones. Rashi has a similar approach, but Rashi says, no. You see, if you took the stones and you punched holes into them to support the beams that would then support these 3 stories of exterior chambers, you would be actually being mekalkel. In some way, you would reduce or actually profane some of the kedusha, some of the sanctity of those stones themselves. So you want to make sure that they're complete. You don't want those stones to be just support, where you can punch a hole into them to support things. So in that sense, what you had is you had this step up. And versus what you would normally imagine, that the biggest room would be at the base, and then you move up and up and up. You'd had the exact opposite. So you had the steps on which to support everything. One more time to Pasuk Zayin. V'habayit b'banoto even shlema masa nivna, u'makavot v'hagarzen kol klei habarzel lo nishma b'bayit b'banoto. And the stones that were in the Beit HaMikdash, in that case, you didn't hear them. They were brought complete. And you didn't hear the hammers and you didn't hear the saws. So we all know about the mitzvah and the Torah. When it comes to building the Mizbeach, that you can't use iron tools against them. The question is that the same thing that's happening here? Is it also that the walls of the Beit HaMikdash, the stones that made up the Beit HaMikdash, also were carved out by this miraculous worm, the shamir? Or does it mean something else? The Gemara in Sota says, and Daf Mem Tetam Bet, that there's a machloket. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, just like the stones of the Mizbeach, the stones that were used to build the Beit HaMikdash also were created by this miraculous worm, the shamir, and no iron utensil ever touched it. Rabbi Nechemia disagrees, and that seems to be the majority opinion, that what it means when it says that you didn't have the garzen and the makavot, you didn't have the hammers, you didn't have the saws, okay, the chisels in the Beit HaMikdash, what that really just means is that everything was prepared outside and the stones were brought to the Beit HaMikdash and the building was built prefab. It was all created outside. And we never had those sounds in the Beit HaMikdash. It wasn't that it was prohibited to use such things in creating the stones. It's just in the Beit HaMikdash that was considered profane to do so. One of the interesting points, by the way, is in just a moment, and we learned about it last week, about all of the wood that was brought to the Beit HaMikdash. Well, we're going to have the cedar and we're going to have the cypress or the juniper brought in a moment. No one ever proposes that the wood was not cut down with axes and with saws. So it's not that there's an absolute prohibition of using these kinds of materials. It's just simply that these kinds of materials or these kinds of implements were not brought to the Beit HaMikdash because that was considered an element of profanity. That was the Even Shlema. They were brought all prepared. Says in Pasuk Chet, Petach Hatzela Hatichona El Katef Habayit Hayamanit. Now, how did you get into those outer chambers of the 3 stories? So, according to this Pasuk, it says the doorway to get into the middle one. Now, the problem with saying the middle one is the last time we used Tichonam, we used it to refer to the second story. The second story we see will be about 7.5 to 10 feet off the ground. So it doesn't make sense that the opening was going to be on a second story. Nowhere do we see descriptions of stairways or anything else for that. And as a result, Targum Yonatan says that this Petach Hatzela Tichona is Arita. It is of the ground level. What does it mean, Tichona in the middle? Well, the middle is a number of different possibilities, but the Vilna Gaon says very simply, it meant the middle of the wall. That on, as we'll see, El Katef Habayit Hayamanit, on the right side of the building, at ground level, the middle one of those chambers had an exterior door. And that exterior door is what ultimately led to all of the other chambers in sequence, one after the next. And to buttress the idea of what the Targum Yonatan says, that there was a middle, that the Tichona was the ground level. Well, if you notice, the next step says that there were bilulim. Now, bilulim, according to Rashi, based on Targum Yonatan, is that there were circular staircases that were built into each one of these rooms that went up to the level above. But if you look at how these levels above are described, that it went up to the middle and up to the higher. Now to the third level. If we start at ground level, like Targum Yonatan says, that the first tichona means in the middle, east to west of the ground level, there was a doorway to the outside. If that's what we say, now it makes sense. Okay, now I go up to the second floor, then I go up to the third floor. If I'm starting at the third floor, there doesn't seem to be any description of how you get to the first floor. And so as a result, the Targum Yonatan actually seems to be very much the pshat. In essence, what we're saying is that the word tichona is used in a number of different ways. There is middle in terms of horizontal. It was the middle of the ground level floor chambers, and there's middle in a vertical sense, where it means the second story. Vayiven et habayit vayichaleu. And now we go that he builds the house, he completes it, and when the exterior structure of the house was complete, vayispon et habayit gevim ushderot barazim. Now, he then puts a ceiling. Now, this vayispon, Rashi says it's the terminology of kisui hatikra. There is, when you build, even nowadays, when you build a roof, there is both an upper and a lower part of every roof. Here you can have that same kind of concept, the kisui hatikra, because we have the upper and lower. The question is, where's the lower? According to Rashi, if you recall, and in Rashi's drawings, the lower was a drop ceiling. And so you saw in Rashi's description, the drop ceiling went like this. And so over here, there is a roof, and over here, there is a ceiling, right here. So that's Rashi's explanation. According to the Sforno, where it's not a drop roof of the same sense, rather it just means there's an upper and a lower part, like you'll find in any roof that we build nowadays. And what is it made out of? It's made out of two pieces of material. It's made out of cedar, but there are cedar beams and there are cedar planks. Gevim u'sderot. Sderot are planks. That seems to be the major support. The gevim was some kind of lattice work that was made at the ceiling. Could have been lattice work or just straight beams back and forth. If you look in this picture, you see that there's a description. It looks like some kind of lattice work of how things were constructed. This is the left-hand picture along the way. Vayiven et hayatzia al kol habayit chamesh amot komato. And now we're talking about the outer rooms. Well, we knew the size of the outer rooms were 5, 6, and 7. But now we also know about the idea of the height. The rooms had somewhere between a 7.5 and 10-foot ceiling. There were 5 amot up the way. Vayachoz et habayit batzei arazim, and it was attached to the building with cedar beams. Now again, if you remember, there was like a step, and so the cedar beams were able to lie on top of the step, and then the next level up, and then it lay on top of that step as well. And that's what it means it's holding on to. It isn't the normal kind of attachment, but it is an attachment. Pasuk Yud Aleph is a side move. And now, this is one of 2 times where we find HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking directly to Shlomo HaMelech. Vayihi dvar Hashem el Shlomo lemor. And after the major part of the building was completed, but before all of the finish work was done, God speaks to Shlomo and he says to him, an important statement, Habayit hazeh asher atavonem, in telech bechukotai ve'mishpatai ta'aseh, if you go ahead and you walk in my ways, v'shamart et kol mitzvotai lalecha behem, and you guard all of my mitzvot to walk that way, v'akimoti et dvarei, I'm going to live up to what I had told you. Asher dibarti el David avicha, which I had told to David, your father. V'shachanti v'toch b'nei Yisrael, v'lo e'ezov et am Yisrael. And I will live among the Jewish people. Now, obviously, v'shachanti v'toch b'nei Yisrael, this recalls the original point when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to build the Mishkan, v'shachanti v'tocham, that you're going to vasuli mikdash v'shachanti v'tocham, you shall make for me a sanctuary, and I shall live in their midst. And there he says, v'shachanti v'toch b'nei Yisrael, v'lo ezov et am Yisrael, I'm going to live in the midst of the Jewish people, and I will not forsake the Jewish people. Why was this statement necessary to be made? And the Barbanel suggests because when you listen to the way Shlomo has just completed the exterior of the building, this is a massive structure. This is a structure which, even in the ancient world, was a structure that drew amazement. It was one of the wonders of the world. Think about it, having a 120 amot structure, 240 feet into the air of a building is just a massive feat of architecture. Nevertheless, says the Abarbanel, it's precisely because this building was so enormous and so magnificent and looked so powerful that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to remind Shlomo HaMelech, don't think this building is going to last forever. It will only last forever if you do what's right. You can build the building out of the most massive stones, but those massive stones, God forbid, would come tumbling down if you don't live up to your responsibilities, which is what ultimately, unfortunately, will happen in 410 years from now. Now we go back and we step back into the building itself. Vayiven Shlomo et habayit v'yechaleu. This Vayiven Shlomo et habayit v'yechaleu is exactly what happened before, where it says in Pasuk Tet, the same words. When you take a side turn for a couple of moments, it's not unusual in Tanakh for there to be a revisit of what had been going on before. Vayiven et kirot habayit mibaita betzlaot arazim mekarka habayit at kirot hasipun. And now we're doing the finish work. And in this finish work, what's happening is first that in the middle chamber, the Kodesh, Shlomo HaMelech is going to panel all of the walls, and he's paneling the walls with cedar wood, mikarka bayit ad kirot hasipun, from the floor to the ceiling. Tzipa eitz mibayit. Okay, and he went ahead and he put those wood panels on the inside. But he used cypress or juniper. He used this stronger, harder wood for the purpose of flooring. Now, two just very simple things between the difference between cedar and cypress. Cedar, if you remember, are these tall, massive trees. Well, these tall, massive trees can create planks for paneling that can be very, very tall. 30 amot, which was the height of that middle section, the Heichal, is not so big when it comes to a cypress. However, when it comes, to a cedar tree. When it comes to a cypress, they're not that tall. And those are smaller pieces of hardwood, and that was the planking for the floor. And that's also part of the reason between the two, the strength of the two kinds of woods and the size of the two kinds of wood. Vayiven et esrim amami yarketei habayit betzlot arazim min hakarka ad hakirot. And now in Pasuk Tetzayin, we're talking about the Kodesh HaKodashim, that smaller chamber, the last one, which is also called the Dvir. And there, he built the 20 amot from the floor to the ceiling, Vayiven lo mibayit ledvir lekodesh HaKodashim. And he put that same kind of paneling in the Dvir that he had put into the Heichal itself. The arba'im ba'amah haya habayit hu ha'heichal lifnei, and he says, going back to the Heichal, that was 40 amot in size. The other was 20 amot in size. The erez el pnei habayit pnima, and the cedar which was inside the Heichal, miklaot pkaim upturei tzitzim hakol erez ein even nira, completely covered the stone, and on it were bas relief carvings that included miklaot, like lattice, or another way of a network of pekaim. Pekaim, according to the Tzudot, are carvings of fruit. According to others, it may be the bulb of an unopened flower. And many times in the translations, they use the phrase knobs. Okay, and B'turei tzitzim are flowers that are already opened. You didn't see any stone whatsoever. Udvir b'toch habayit pnima hechin l'titen sham et aron brit Hashem. And now the inner chamber, the Dvir, the Kodesh HaKodashim, was prepared that it would have the Aron sitting in there. V'lifnei hadvir esrim ama orech v'esrim ama rocha v'esrim ama komato. Here comes the problematic pasuk. The problematic pasuk again gives you the dimensions of the Dvir. And the dimensions of the Dvir, once again, are very simply going to be 20 by 20 by 20. Interestingly, and I didn't mention this earlier, if you compare all of the dimensions of this building to the Mishkan, they're double. So the Kodesh HaKodashim in the Mishkan was 10 by 10 by 10. But here it's 20 by 20, 20, and here you again have the issue. We said the ceiling here was 30. In Divrei Yamim we have 120, and here we have 20. So how do you resolve those? And there are those the two different approaches. One was there were two different heights. The Ulam was 120, and everything else, there was a drop ceiling of some kind, or let's rephrase it. There was the internal room only had a 20 height, and we'll see different options, versus the Hechal, where you had 30. But here it says clearly it was 20 by 20 by 20 was the size of the Devir. Now, there are 5 basic approaches on how to explain it. Okay, one approach is a simple one, which is in Bava Batra, that says, and it says this is not actually the 20 height, is not 20 height from the floor to the ceiling, but rather it's 20 height from above the kruvim that we're going to learn about in a little bit. There were 2 massive cherubs that were constructed beyond the 2 cherubs that were over the ark. There were 2 massive cherubs in that room that were 10 amot high, and it was 20 amot of clear space above it. That's the Gemara. So according to the Gemara, both the Hechal and the Devir, both the middle chamber and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the innermost chamber, those chambers had exactly the same ceiling heights. That's one. The Radak says that actually the wood only went 20 up, but there was another 10 amot above it. That other 10 amot was covered with precious jewels. It was a different kind of covering, and so we're only talking here about the wood paneling. Rashi says that there was an attic above, and so it was only 20, and the attic went up. There is a proposal that is not within Chazal. Actually, we finished Chazal. The Abarbanel says that actually the wall between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodashim, between the Hechal and the Devir, was this wall right here, was only 20 amot high. But the ceiling was 30 amot. And what would you do with that extra 10 amot? This area here was not, as this drawing represents, a wall, but actually was open. And the reason it was open was because on Yom Kippur, Aaron HaKohen, or whoever, sorry, not Aaron, but the Kohen Gadol would go in and he would burn incense. And this allowed the incense from this open area to go and fill also the Hechal as well. So there are 4 explanations within Chazal. All of them take into account the 20, but some of them say, no, the room was actually 30. And others say, no, the room was only 20. Then you have to account for the extra 10. Easiest explanation is there was an attic. There is a proposal that's brought in the Encyclopedia Mikra'it, and it is suggested that maybe, as opposed to the floor being at the same level, maybe it had an elevated floor by 10 amot. Why? According to the archaeologists, maybe, since we know the Kodesh HaKodashim was supposed to have been built over the, not supposed to, was built over the Even Shtiyah, over the foundation stone. Nowadays, the foundation stone is believed to be within the Golden Dome, within the Dome of the Rock. That's the rock, the foundation stone. What they did is they built up the floor to be on top of the stone, so you'd have a level stone. That's a proposal. It's not found within Chazal. It's creative, and it's kedai to mention. But we don't really know for sure what it was. It is most, Chazal seem to be pretty clear that the floor level was the same across the board with all of them. Vayitzapeu, still in the middle of Pasuk Chaf, Vayitzapeu Zahav Sagur. And in the Kodesh HaKodashim, in the Devir, they use the finest of gold. Zahav Sagur literally means closed gold. And there's a number of different theories of why it was closed gold, from the Medrash that says that whenever a merchant had this kind of gold, he had to close his store because everybody wanted it, to what the Mitzudot says. It's very simple, that this gold had been closed off for the longest amount of time in being purified. And so it was closed within the cauldron that made it the finest kind of gold. And for this one place within the Kodesh, within the Beit HaMikdash, the innermost chamber, which was the most sacred, had the greatest kind of gold. Vayatzaf Mizbeach Ares. And at the same time, this gold was also used to cover over the Mizbeach with cedar. Now, the Mizbeach of cedar, there is inside the Hechal. In the middle of the Hechal, in the middle of that middle chamber, there were three classic items. To the right was the Shulchan. To the left was the menorah. And in the middle was, very simply, this Mizbeach HaKetoret, the incense altar. The incense altar we're going to talk about. Vayetzav Shlomo et habayit mipnima zahav sagur ve'yaber beratukot zahav lifnei hadavir v'yitzapeu zahav. And now, with just a mention of the Mizbeach for a moment, we go back. It's a little strange of this switch real quickly, but we go back and we talk about the fact that all of the gold was used to cover all of the paneling, okay? And this gold that was used was attached in some kind of chains. Now, we really don't know. Ve'ya'aber beratukot zahav lifnei hadavir. And there were these chains of gold that were before the innermost chamber, the Devir. The Radak says that these chains were actually put where the curtain that would separate the two rooms, the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodeshim, would be placed. The Barbanel says, no, these were like hooks almost that were used to make sure that the gold was attached well to the wood itself. Here is where the Abarbanel and the Vilna Gaon both jump in and say, no. Remember the wall, the ceiling of the Devir, of the Kodesh HaKodeshim, according to them, was 30 amot high. The wall separating the Kodesh from the Kodesh HaKodeshim was only 20. There was that opening of 10 to allow the smoke to come in. Both the Vilna Gaon and the Abarbanel say they were chains that hung from the ceiling from 30 amot to the 20 amot, closing and not closing off the Kodesh HaKodeshim from the Kodesh, allowing the smoke to be able to penetrate, and at the same time creating like this false wall above the physical wall itself. Vet kol habayit tzipa zahav ad tom kol habayit v'chol hamizbeach asher ledvir tzipa zahav. And the rest of the chamber, the Hechal, was also covered with gold, as was the Mizbeach HaKetoret. Vayas b'dvir, and now he made within the Kodesh HaKodeshim, or made for the Kodesh HaKodeshim, Shnei Kruvim. He made two cherubs. Again, these are the two cherubs that were standing on the ground and went up 10 amot, Atzei Shaman, made out of Atzei Shaman. Now, Atzei Shaman is a complicated idea. And the reason is halacha. All of us, Atzei Shaman, you go to Israel, if you were to use Atzei Shaman, they would look at you funny, but they would know that you're referring in biblical sense to olive wood. Olives the source of the oil, the wood of the oil. Olive wood, nice and simple. But we have a problem with olive wood. Halachically, you're not allowed to chop down an olive tree if it's still producing olives, because we can't chop down fruit trees. So how would they get the olive wood? So it could be that it comes from very old olive trees that no longer produce fruit. If they no longer produce fruit, then you can harvest the wood. Nice and simple. Maybe that's what it means. Professor Yehuda Felix, who was the expert when it came to the question of zoology and botany in the time of Tanakh, he says no, that this Atzei Shaman may just simply be a pine tree, that it's an oren, it's a pine tree, it's not the olive tree. It is a tree that had a lot of sap, and if you ever go near a pine tree, you know there's a lot of sap there, and maybe that's what it's referring to, which would solve it. There are others who suggest other kinds of trees as well, but you can't get around the issue of a fruit tree and how do you harvest the wood off of a fruit tree. But they made it out of this wood, whatever the wood was. It was 10 amot high. The chamesh amot kanaf hakruva achat, the chamesh amot kanaf hakruva shenit, and these two kruvim were actually had wings, where the wingspan of each was 5 on each side. So in other words, each one of the kruvim had a 10 amma wingspan. Ultimately, Eser amot. Mikzaot kanafa v'agzot kanafa, from one edge of the wing to the next edge of the wing. Ve'eser b'ama kruva sheni. And it had the same thing with the second cherub, also 10 amot, midah achat v'ketzav achad l'shnei kruvim. And it had exactly the same measure for both kruvim. Komata kruva achad eser b'ama v'chein kruva sheni. It was the height, both of them were the same. They were both 10 amot in height. Vayiten et hakruvim b'toch habayit hapnimi. And they put the kruvim into the inner chamber. ויפרסו את כנפי הקרובים, ותיגע כנף האחד בקיר, וכנף הקרוב השני נוגעת בקיר השני, וכנפיהם אל תוך הבית נוגעות כנף אל כנף. And what they did is they put them side by side. So if you have 10 amot, the wingspan, and the other is 10 amot, the wingspan, and the room is 20 amot, so went from one wall to the next, these, as opposed to what we imagine on the Aron, that the Knafim were facing forward, here they were outward, and they covered the entire span of the room itself from one end to the next. Pasuk Chavchet, Vayitzafet HaKruvim Zahav. And these wooden kruvim were also covered with gold. Vet kol kirot habayit mesav kala betuchei miklaot kruvim v'timrot v'turei tzitzim v'lifnim v'lechitzon. And in all of the wood paneling, you had these networks, this decoration that included pictures, date palms and flowers, and in the hechal, in the dvir, in the inner chamber, and in the middle or outer chamber, because remember the ulam, the lobby, was really not considered part of the building, even though it was an integral entranceway. And in fact, even the floor of the area of the Beit HaMikdash was covered with gold. Now, we never said in the Devir that there was wood planking in the Devir, in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the innermost chamber, which is why the Ralbag says actually the gold lay right on the earth. There wasn't wood planking, it was just gold at the bottom, which probably would have meant that it had to be a much thicker piece of gold that was down there. And now, the doorway into the Devir, into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, had doors made out of this wood, the Atzei Shaman, Ha'ayol Mezuzot Chamishit. And it had, interestingly, the mezuzah for it, the doorpost, was called the Chamishit. Now, there's two different opinions of what the Chamishit was. The Gra says Chamishit is because it was the fifth door in the Beit HaMikdash. If you think about it, you had the door before the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you had the door before the Hechal, the Kodesh, you had the door before the Ulam, before you got into the lobby, you had the door that went into the Ezrat Yisrael, and then you had the door going into the Beit HaMikdash. So it was the door number 5. That's one possibility. The other possibility, which a lot of the Meforshim take, is that actually, this is Rashi's approach, the doorpost was not a normal kind of squared off figure, a squared off wood, but rather it had 5 sides to it. That's why it's called the door, the Chamishit. The aisle, by the way, is the mashkof, is the lintel above. Ushtei daltot atzei shemen, and there were 2 doors of this wood. V'kala lehem miklaot kruvim v'tomorot upturei tzitzim, and it had carvings on it. And here the carving also included cherubs, and also date palms, and also flowers. V'tzipa zahav, and it was covered with gold. Vayared ala kruvim v'ala tomorot et zahav, and they put all of the gold over these doors. V'chein asa lepetach ha'echal, and similarly, this was also done for the entrance into the Kodesh. Mezuzot atzei shaman me'et revi'it. Here again, the doorposts were again made out of the Atzei Shaman, and it was a 4. Again, it's either door number 4 on its way in, or it is a squared off kind of lintel. Ushte daltot atzev roshim shnei tzlaim hadelet hachat glilim ushne klaim hadelet hashenit glilim. And there were two doors, and on the two doors there were also hinges that were on them. Interestingly, the Mishnah in Midot, which talks about the size of the third Beit HaMikdash, talks about these doors, and it's a machloket there, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, the way these doors were structured, they were folding doors. And what happened was they closed the entire area. We'll see in a minute. You had to close that entire opening of 10 amot. Each door, therefore, was 5. And they folded in half, so each panel was 2.5 amot. And they folded back into the width of the entrance doorway. So you'll have 2 sets of doors. It's a 5 amah width of the wall at that point. Massive walls, 10 feet deep. And the doors would fold into that area. According to the Tanakama, they weren't folding doors, they just were plain doors. And once the outer doors would fold in and cover over the inner stone, and the inner doors would fold in and cover over the inner part of the room itself. Those parts it was covering, according to both opinions, were not covered with gold and not covered with cedar. So the doors actually were used to create this continuity of wood covered by gold throughout the entire area. Sorry, I lost my place. Okay. Lamed bet, u'shtei daltot atzei shemen v'kala aleihem miklaot kruvim v'tmorot v'terei tzitzim v'tzipa zahav. And again, you had 2 more doors. Those 2 doors were made out of this wood. They had the carvings in them of the cherubs and the date palms and the flowers. And they were covered with gold. V'yered ala kruvim v'al tmorot et zahav. The gold was put on. V'chein asa lepetach ha'echal. And similarly, the same was done for the Petach Echal, for the entrance into the Echal, mezuzot atzei shemen, made revi'it. We did this. Ushtei daltot atzei broshim, and there were 2 doors that were made. In this case, it was made out of cypress. Shnei tzlaim hadelet achad glilim, ushnei klaim hadelet hashenit glilim, and they had their hinges, the round hinges. V'kala kruvim utmorot b'torei tzitzim v'tzipa zahav miyushar ala mechuka, and they made the networks, the beautiful designs of the cherubs and the date palms and the flowers, and it was covered with gold, and the gold was smoothed over the entire area of the wood. Now they built the area, what we'll call the Ezrat Yisrael, the area around the building of the Beit HaMikdash. Shlosha turei gazit, it had 3 levels of stone, v'tur krutot arazim, and then it had 1 level of wood planking. In terms of building, this provided for the Beit HaMikdash tremendous stability. So it was 3 stone, 1 wood. Bashana revi'it yusad Beit Hashem beyerach ziv. And now, after describing the building, and nothing really inside the building except the Mizbeach Ketoret, describing the building, we say the foundation was laid in Yerach Ziv, in Iyar, of the 4th year, uvashana ha'achatesrei beyerach bul, and in the 11th year in Cheshvan, hu achodesh hashmini, is the 8th month, kala habayit. The house was finished, the construction, l'chol dvarav v'l'chol mishpatav, of all the things that had to be finished, vayivneu sheva shanim. It was a 7-year project to build this Beit HaMikdash. And with this, we're going to end the parak. And next week, we will be picking up where we left